The Dyatlov Pass incident is the story of the death of 9 student hikers in the Ural Mountains. It's often referred to as Russia's greatest mystery. In 1959, after failing to report back, 9 students were found frozen to death in subpolar conditions.
When I was working for the Moscow Times newspaper and I came across the information about the Dyatlov Pass mystery, the difference between all kinds of mysteries and this particular one is that it's very well documented. There is a criminal case, there are pictures, there are diaries, there are still witnesses who were there, rescue party, so one can still do investigation.
Found without their winter clothes, miles from their shredded tent, and with no sign of an avalanche or natural disasters. Yet somehow they suffered injuries that crushed their bodies, and horrifically for some, their tongues and eyeballs were missing.
It appears that the officials involved at the time of the autopsies basically tried to sweep this entire thing under the rug, trying to make it look like some unfortunate accident.
Mysterious lights were seen in the sky, and the Russian KGB swarmed the site, clouding the whole story in 60 years of mystery.
Я считаю, что причиной трагедии стал тот объект, который туристы сфотографировали на последнем кадре пленки.
Today, there are 2 sides to this case. What was reported by the official investigators at the time, which seems almost willfully incomplete. And then there's the years of conspiracy theories, of Soviet government cover-ups and military tests.
Часть материалов из этого дела была убрана. Я полагаю, что она была убрана. Категорически нет. Я категорически не согласна с этой версией, что все туристы замерзли.
The cover-ups are so far-fetched, I think, overall. They're a way for people to explain the unexplainable or the unexplained, whereas the reality is some cases are just tough to solve.
The story has inspired many Russian TV shows and documentaries, peddling armchair theories from alien visitors to Russian Yetis.
Никаких природных катаклизмов, которые бы могли привести к этому, это нет. Моя точка зрения личная, что их убили.
With so many conflicting stories, I've come to Russia to ask the question, what is the true story of the Dyatlov Pass? I became obsessed with this story after reading the hundreds of bizarre and unusual theories. Military cover-ups, UFOs, and even a Russian Yeti have been blamed. But I soon realized the real story is even more sinister than I ever could have imagined. Using the hikers' actual photos and diaries, this is what we know so far. In January 1959, a team of 10 young hikers, led by group leader Igor Dyatlov, began the doomed expedition deep into the Ural Mountains. 10 days into their journey, and the team reaches the peak known to the locals as the Dead Mountain. Then, something goes terribly wrong. In the middle of the night, for reasons unknown, the hikers cut their way out of the tent. Track showed they fled down the mountain in freezing conditions without winter clothes or boots. Weeks after they were due to report back, search parties were sent out, only to uncover the worst. They were found more than a mile away, each one suffering inexplicable injuries, ranging from cuts and bruises to fractured skulls, broken ribs, and even a missing tongue. The Soviet government closed the case and sealed the records, stating only that the hikers had frozen to death for reasons unknown. Renewed interest began more than 30 years later after the fall of the Soviet Union, and the original case file was released to the public. Searching through hundreds of online articles, I started to spot some inconsistencies. That's when I found a group of Russians dedicated to uncovering the truth. I reached out to Yuri Kuntsevich, founder of the Dyatlov Foundation in Yekaterinburg, Russia. I asked a lot of questions, hardly expecting to receive a reply. And then, I did. What started out as a somewhat obsessive Google search just got very real. I think I've always been obsessed with trying to figure out why things are the way they are, and I don't like "we don't know" as an answer. I've always loved exploring weird and sometimes dangerous locations, and I think that's what brought me to documentary filmmaking in the first place. I started my filmmaking career 20 years ago in television news, and I realized pretty early on, if you want to get the real story, you have to get out and talk to people. And this story is driving me crazy. I keep watching so many online videos and podcasts, all repackaging the same information. But that's not an investigation. It's not adding anything new to the story. Before I decide if I should go to Russia, I have someone closer to home that can help me understand the hiker's story. Svetlana Oss is a Russian journalist now living in the US. She broke what was probably the first English-language story on Dyatlov's group for the Moscow Times in 2007. She has since written one of the most well-researched books on the subject, and I'm keen to learn more from her about this case.
There is so much behind this story. There is so much information that need to be considered. Some people believe that aliens killed them. Some people believe it was American spies who are responsible. There are so many crazy stories that it was sex responsible for some tension among the group members, and they just killed each other. I think all these theories are pretty weird.
The unusual details in this case have given rise to so many strange theories. The first, and perhaps most confusing, is that the criminal case appears to have begun before the hikers were even reported missing.
This is a criminal case. I believe you have it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a new cover.
Okay.
Some people believe that the very fact that we can find 6 here says that the authorities knew something before and they wanted to hide something.
What's unusual is that the hikers were not due to report back until at the very earliest, the 12th of February. So how could a case have been started a week before anyone would have even suspected they were missing? For many, this has been one of the most compelling arguments for a Soviet government cover-up. But for me, it's proof that there's so much that's misunderstood about this case. There's another document in the file, which we know from its detail was clearly from an interview conducted in March, but it was accidentally dated the 6th of February, and it's this date that was copied in error to the front cover. A simple clerical error igniting years of conspiracy theories. But the mysteries certainly don't stop there, and others are harder to explain. I'm convinced more than ever that if I want to find the truth, I have to go to Russia. I keep telling myself it will be safe, but without knowing what actually happened to the hikers, how can I be sure? Having filmed documentaries around the world, I'm used to a certain amount of the unknown. But this is my first time in Russia, and certainly my first time without a production team or support. Unsure how welcomed we would be by the Russian government for investigating this case, my cameraman and I have flown in under the radar and told as few people as possible. Easier for us to go unnoticed, perhaps easier to go missing. Yuri Kuntsevich was just a young boy when he attended the funerals of the hikers in 1959. He himself joined the university's Explorers Club and has since been on many winter expeditions, including several to the Dyatlov Pass. He's now at the very center of the story, as curator of the Dyatlov Foundation.
Мы поставили себе очень важную цель – узнать причину гибели студентов. И нам надо было знать истину. Вы согласитесь со мной, что истина во всем мире – это самая дорогая вещь.
His home office has become a real-life treasure trove of documents, evidence, and personal belongings from the hikers, some of which are at the very heart of the mystery. Tell me, I know there is a famous flashlight that was found on the tent. Is this the flashlight?
Этот фонарик поисковики нашли 26 февраля на склоне палатки. Он лежал поверх снега.
So someone threw it on top of the scene. That's unusual, isn't it?
Подтверждает то, что были посторонние люди. Золотарев, когда его откапывали из снега, то у него на шее висел фотоаппарат.
The cameras found in the tent and on Zolotaryov, along with several rolls of film, give us some of the best evidence in the case. Yet none are as mysterious as the famous 34th frame.
Он, во-первых, подтверждено экспертами, что это не засветка, это настоящий кадр, просто расфокусированный. То есть ребята фотографировали вот этот объект, падающий, летящий объект, с большой скоростью, и они не успели даже навести резкость. То есть он и, очевидно, и стал причиной всей трагедии.
This last picture taken by the hikers is just one of many strange details that have convinced Yuri and his colleagues that this was no accident. But if something scared them out of the tent, why didn't they just return when the threat had passed? Why would they leave behind their warm clothes and boots, everything they needed to stay alive?
They were young people and they were friends. They all were students at the Ural Polytechnical University. For them, going to mountains to challenge the elements was something really exciting. Igor Dyatlov was considered to be the most experienced member of the Explorers Club. This guy was kind of not interested in anything else but in what we call tourism, going to mountains. It was like his passion. Zina, she had such a bright personality. She was in many expeditions. Some people think that Igor really was involved with Zina, which is not true. Probably he was into her because we know that her picture was found in his pocket. We know by now that she was not interested in Igor romantically because she liked another guy, Yuri Doroshenko. We just know that he came from a very poor family. He was a very brave person. On one expedition, there was a bear approaching the tent, having nothing in his hands. He confronted the bear and made the bear leave. And of course, Zina saw this and she was really impressed. Maybe it was the moment when she fell in love. But this was over by the time the expedition was scheduled. They still were on good terms.
Much of what we now know from the group's journey comes from their very own diaries, which were found abandoned in their tent.
23rd January. It's the last day of preparations and everything has been quite hectic. From 11 in the morning, I was scampering between stores buying different bits and pieces. We were really short of time, but arrived at the railway station with seconds to spare.
Lyudmila was experienced in tourism too. She looked like a really shy, cute girl, but she was very strong. Once she was even shot in her leg by mistake by some hunter, and she persevered through that. Rustem Slobodin was the most athletic guy in the group. He was really well trained physically. I know that the father of Rustem just couldn't believe that Rustem couldn't make it through that. Sasha Klivatov was a cool guy among them. We don't see him often on pictures. He was a very private person.
One member of the team proves to be even more enigmatic to this day. 37-year-old Semyon Zolotaryov wasn't previously known to the rest of the group, but he had requested to join the expedition just weeks before their departure.
He was working as instructor of tourism. He also needed one more expedition for some upgrading in his work.
An experienced outdoorsman and soldier, Zolotaryov was awarded medals for his service in World War II. And despite the age difference, it seems Zolotaryov was quickly accepted into the group.
We know that the students kind of embraced this guy. He got really well with the rest in the group. Well, Thibaut, he could make friends easily. Pretty soon, he has become inseparable with Zolotaryov. Thibaut was pretty mature and serious guy despite being very young.
23-year-old Yuri Krivnishenko was considered the joker amongst the group, and his playful antics almost changed the entire course of events.
They were waiting for their next train. He asked Luda, can you give us some money for going to the cafe? She had all the money for the trip. And for some reason she said no.
Our hero Yuri decided to walk around the station handing out a cab for small change after singing a song. He was taken by the police, charging him with deception. Of course, Yuri had to be rescued.
The whole group asked the officers to let Yuri go, which was pretty brave of them, because at that time in Soviet Union, you don't want to mess with police. The very fact that the whole group spoke up for Yuri testifies that they were really, really great friends.
There was a 10th member of the doomed expedition, the only one who would return alive.
Yuri Yudin is an enigma person. Girls trusted him. He was not cool, he was not sarcastic, he was just kind and a good friend. Yuri had to quit the trip. I know that he suffered a great deal because of this. He told me, if I could ask God only one question, that would be, what happened to my friends?
Dyatlov and the team are commemorated here at the Yekaterinburg Cemetery. It's a powerful moment for me and a reminder that these people weren't just some story on the internet, but were real people with real lives, families, and friends. Being here makes me realize that if I really want to understand what happened to them, I need to understand their journey. I have to attempt to retrace the hikers' steps to the Dyatlov Pass. Named after expedition leader Igor Dyatlov, the Dyatlov Pass is a dangerous place to reach in winter even today. But I found someone willing to guide me on what should be an 8-day expedition to the subpolar region of the Ural Mountains. I'm told if anyone can get me there, it's this man.
Look, how's the weather looking?
Better.
It's getting better, yeah.
Yeah. Minus 20, minus 15.
Yeah.
It's okay.
What's the route? It's a train up.
From Ekaterinburg to Ivdel.
Okay, straight to there.
Yeah.
Okay.
We will go to Vizhai by car. It's like a end of the road, and from Vizhai we'll go to Dyatlov Pass by snowmobile. This way about 50 kilometers, and the other day 40 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
And then to Dyatlov Pass 25 kilometers.
When we get to the pass,
Yep.
we will stay one night, first night.
First night, I depend on weather, depend on the tracks, depend on everything. Sometimes the weather can be extremely bad in mountain areas.
But if anyone was to get hurt or anything like that, what's the plan to get
To get what?
to get out?
It's как сказать, нет выхода.
There is no exit.
We have to get ourselves out.
Зарегистрировались в Ивдельском поисково-спасательном отряде.
So,
Поэтому, если что, у нас будет спутниковый телефон, и мы позвоним. They will bring your body.
Okay, great. So the camera gear is all pretty much ready, and yeah, tomorrow we go on our journey to the Dyatlov Pass, and I'm pretty excited for the adventure of it, I've got to admit, but at the same time apprehensive. You know, it's a serious undertaking. I was told that we needed to upgrade our winter equipment because some of the stuff I brought wasn't good enough. I think there's no messing around with this. I mean, this is serious conditions. We can't forget that a number of the hikers died from hypothermia, and that's something we've really got to take into consideration.
Tomorrow, the journey begins to the frozen wilderness and the very mountain where the Dyatlov group spent their last night alive.
What do you think might have happened?
My opinion,
Yeah, your opinion.
it was probably small avalanche. And after that, they had mistake immediately go away to the forest area. Even in minus 25, but with the wind, without clothes, it's very, very easy. In a few minutes, you're dying.
Right.
Facing increased media attention, the prosecutor's office launched a new investigation in 2018, and its recent conclusion backed the avalanche theory. The report stated that the hikers fled their tent at the first signs of an avalanche on Mount Holochakhl. Descending far from the tent without their winter clothes or boots, they subsequently died from hypothermia and natural events. The finding seems to present a simple conclusion to the case, but for many it doesn't hold up. Vladislav Karelin was a fellow hiker and friend of Dyatlov. He joined the search efforts to find his friends.
Я неоднократно путешествовал в лавиноопасных местах, и я знал, что такое лавина. Мы когда прилетели на вертолете, и на следующий день посмотрели место палатки, там никаких признаков лавины. Никаких. Абсолютно.
83-year-old Alexei was close friends with the group and also has serious doubts about an avalanche.
Ну, я и все члены правления группы памяти, фонда памяти группы Дятлова, все считаем, что лавинная теория никакого отношения к этому факту не имела. И выдумана она не случайно, а сознательно людьми, которые хотят затуманить обстановку.
Perhaps the investigation photos from the time explain why the lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, felt that such an avalanche was implausible. One of the last photos taken by the hikers clearly shows ski poles placed at the front of the tent. These ski poles seem to have been unmoved by any avalanche when the search teams arrived several weeks later.
And here we are, on the train. We sang songs we know and learned new ones. We are on the verge of falling asleep, and the Ural taiga spreads out in all directions. I wonder what awaits us on this trip.
With little more than a few hours sleep on the train, we retrace the hikers' 50-mile journey to Vizhai by car. The cramped vehicles seem surprisingly capable on these snow-covered roads, but that's not the case for everyone. It strikes me just how important it is to help your fellow traveler in these freezing conditions. After all, you never know when it might be your time in need. And it's not lost on me that Lyuda's next diary note on the very same stretch of road is an uncanny echo of our own journey.
During our walk, there was an incident. A car coming from the forest got stuck in the opposite direction. Our guys rushed to the rescue. Finally, they pulled it out.
Vizhai was the last official village on the hiker's journey and gateway to the Ural Mountains for many adventurous hikers. The team makes last-minute preparations for the ambitious journey ahead. Our group of 4 will lead on snowmobiles. A backup team will follow a day or so behind on husky sleds. I'm curious to find out what the team thinks about the mystery.
So, Anya, tell me, what do you think might have happened to the Dyatlov team?
I think it's maybe our government want to make a new weapon. Maybe it's not an explosion weapon, but chemical.
Одна такая версия. Дятловцы, они у мансов в пути взяли какие-то ценности из их хранилища, в общем. Святыни какой-то. И мансы в итоге их преследовали. Когда дятловцы уснули в палатке, тогда шаманы кинули им дурман. Вот. И начали дятловцы выходить из палатки, и, соответственно, их начали убивать. Вот. И это как бы месть за то, что они своровали их, разграбили их святыню.
Do you believe that's something that's possible, that could have happened?
Вполне могло случиться это, да.
The Mansi are the indigenous people that have lived in the Russian Siberian region for thousands of years. Some members of a prominent Mansi family even offered to help with the search efforts. And as possible witnesses to the strange events, I'm hoping to encounter some of the Mansi people on our journey. There's no backing out now. Whatever happened to the hikers in 1959, we'll just have to hope was a one-off incident.
January 26th. We negotiated to go to Settlement 41 by a truck. We froze pretty good riding in the back.
Leaving the last real town and any access to emergency services, we follow the wide meandering path of the frozen Lozva River. We're traveling 100 miles on an 8-day expedition through freezing temperatures and dangerous conditions to reach the Dyatlov Pass. The biting cold reminds me that no one really knows what happened to the hikers that night at a place called Mount Holoshakal, or in English, the Dead Mountain. Four days into their journey, and the group reached a small logging camp called Settlement 41. These hard-working men of the Urals may have been among the last people to see the hikers alive.
We were met very hospitably. We stayed in the barracks where the guys live. They are all civilians. The guys are all young, interesting, and even cute.
The following day, the team negotiated with one of the locals to take their packs by horse and cart for the next leg of their journey. But even without their heavy packs, it took the team 7 hours of tough ski hiking to arrive at this derelict settlement. Abandoned 7 years earlier, it was one of Russia's infamous gulags, a forced labor camp for criminals. Undeterred by its past, the team found one hut still intact enough to provide modest shelter for the night. But for Yuri Yudin, the cold weather and arduous journey had flared up his back pain, forcing him to make a decision that would profoundly affect his fate.
Yuri Yudin got sick, something with the nerve of his leg, and he is going home. It is such a pity, of course, that he leaves us, especially for me and Zina.
Yuri said an emotional goodbye to his friends, looking forward to seeing them again soon. Oblivious to the events that would unfold in just 3 short days. Yuri died in 2013, aged 75, never knowing what really happened that tragic night. At his request, he was buried in Yekaterinburg Cemetery, next to his friends, reunited at last. Our expedition to the Dyatlov Pass is about to face its own challenges. We reach a small frozen river outlet that has partially thawed. Worryingly, all around I hear the surface ice cracking beneath us. Thankfully, we reach safety and a well-earned rest.
Diary note, Luda. We stopped to rest at 5:30 p.m. on River Lozva. Today we spent our first night in the tent. After dinner, we sat for a long time around the campfire and sang heartfelt songs. Then we resumed our discussions, mostly about love.
It seems the group had no indication that in just 3 short days, disaster would strike. It may be hard to imagine that people would live here, but the Mansi and Khanty peoples of northern western Siberia have called this area home for thousands of years. These indigenous people traditionally survive through fishing, hunting, and herding reindeer. Much of this way of life remains today. Since the 13th century, the 2 separate groups of Mansi and Khanty people were often united in fiercely defending their lands against the invading Russians. But by the time of Soviet-era Russia, the indigenous way of life suffered greatly, as their lands were taken and their numbers diminished. Their shamans and even folk customs were persecuted, so it was not unreasonable that some of the Mansi and Khanty populations had a distrust and resentment towards the Soviet Russians. Dyatlov and his team, however, were greatly intrigued by these indigenous people and were excited to learn more of their language and customs.
Diary note, Nick Thibault. Yes, Mansi, Mansi, Mansi. This word comes up more and more often in our conversations. Sometimes Mansi writings appear on trees. We now have a slogan for our campaign. We are in a country of mysterious signs.
We arrive at a Mansi village some 25 miles away from the Dyatlov Pass, and I'm keen to find out what the villagers remember about the incident.
Есть такая версия, что что-то там случилось из ряда вон, что что-то необычное. Произошел какой-то взрыв, который спровоцировал сход лавины на палатку. Ну а потом началась паника, и туристы разбежались и в дальнейшем замерзли от холода.
This woman's father even joined the rescue team.
Do you like living here?
Да, в лесу хорошо.
It's very cold though.
Холодно, нет, привыкли.
We're making a film about the Dyatlov team. Has she heard of them?
Я-то маленькая была, я не... Тогда 5 лет было, мне было... Это 54-го года рождения мне. Я тогда маленькая была, что я знаю. Но мой отец-то говорил, они говорят, замерзли там. Они же искали тут, отцу его отошли туда.
Several Mansi, well known and respected by officials, were hired as experts to help trace the missing hikers. But as the only inhabitants of the area, there was still an eye of suspicion on the local people. As early theories emerged, investigators were interested in a rumor that the hikers may have stumbled onto a sacred Mansi site and paid a heavy price for their trespass. And when the hiker's tent was discovered, it was the strange cut marks that thrust further suspicion on the Mansi people.
Criminal prosecutor Lev Ivanov. It was established the group suddenly left the tent, and there is a reason to believe that the tent was cut by someone. Establishing if the tent was cut or torn apart is essential to the case.
We know that the first theory of Ivanov was murder. He later said that the students could be scared or forced off the tent only by the group of armed people. At least 9 of them should be there.
As the forensic investigation continued, members of a nearby Mansi family, the Bateryovs, were summoned for questioning about their sacred practices.
My name is Nikolai Bakhteryov. Our prayer stone is in the mountain at the upper reaches of Vizhay River. But Russian men and women are not forbidden to come into the mountain. This mountain has never been guarded by Mansi, and it is not guarded now.
However, when the forensic report on the tent came in, it revealed a shocking discovery. It was indeed cut by a blade, but astonishingly, the report said it was cut from the inside. The experts now believed the panicked tourists cut their own way out of the tent. It was then unlikely that anyone was attacking them from the outside. So the investigation into the local Mansi people was dropped. Lev Ivanov and his team were now left with more questions than answers. Just what were the hikers fleeing from? Our journey has taken us deep into the Urals, many miles away from the nearest town. Home for the night will be this hunting cabin, owned by the Mansi we met earlier today. We settled down for the night on the hard floor, and I'm thankful for the warmth of this cabin. 60 years ago, the Dyatlov team didn't have this luxury as they recorded their penultimate diary entry.
Temperature tonight, minus 26 degrees Celsius. The forest gradually thins and trees get smaller. You can feel the altitude. There's a strong west wind. It blows the snow off the cedar and pine trees, creating the impression of snowfall. As usual, we quickly start a fire and pitch the tent on some fir branches. We are warmed by the fire and go to sleep.
Today we make the journey to the Dyatlov Pass. But of course, nothing is guaranteed in the mountains.
It takes us about 3-4 hours. I hope in case of good weather. The last forecast was on the place which is situated in 100 kilometers from the pass. So
it could be quite different.
Yeah, the weather could be quite different in the mountains area always, you know.
How difficult is the journey today?
Today, it will be mountains, landscapes. You'll see by yourself. It's a bit difficult.
We might fall off today.
Maybe several times. I'll be careful.
What started out as little more than a Google search has led me halfway around the world. Exploring this desolate and beautiful land, so far removed from my modern-day life, brings me closer to Dyatlov and his team than I ever thought possible. I'm beginning to understand why they came here, to challenge themselves physically, to overcome the hardships, and to explore the unknown. Frustratingly, we've come as far as we can today. The fresh snow is too deep and soft for our snowmobiles.
So we're about 1 kilometer away from the Dyatlov Pass tent site. We couldn't take the snowmobiles any closer because this fresh snow, it's a very sloping track, and these are just too heavy for the snowmobiles. So we're going to make a base camp here tonight, and we can make the rest of the way on the snowmobiles without the trolleys. Hard way.
As we settle in for the night, the team reminds me of perhaps one of the more bizarre theories that gain sensationalist attention.
Go to forest.
The Russian Yeti. The hikers created a peculiar document in the style of a newspaper front page called the Evening Ortoten. A transcribed copy was included in the case files, and one headline caused a greater sensation than the hikers could have ever imagined.
In recent years, there has been a heated debate about the existence of Yeti. According to the recent reports, Yeti lives in the northern Urals near Ortoten mountain.
And with a few out-of-focus photos on the team's camera, a legend was born.
With this particular case for Yeti, it's all about misinterpretations of the cultural thing. It was entirely humoristic. It was about making fun of each other, and it's about picture. If you look through all the pictures in this row, all the film, it's obvious that this blurred picture, the last one, is one of the many in a row.
As members of the backup team arrive at base camp, we settle in for the night, hopefully free from any wild beasts, oblivious to the more real dangers of the storm heading our way.
Diary entry, Igor Dyatlov. Today the weather is a bit worse with wind and snow. Until now we walked along a Mansi trail, which was crossed by a deer hunter not long ago. The hunter didn't follow the beaten trail, and we are now following in his steps. Walking is especially hard today. We can't see the trail and have to advance slowly. Tired and exhausted, we started the preparations for the night. We had supper in the warmth of the tent. It is hard to imagine such a comfort somewhere on the ridge with a piercing wind, hundreds of kilometers away from human settlements.
Dyatlov's words would be the very last left by the group. His diary seems to foreshadow the terrible events to come. The following day, the team left a cache of food and equipment for their return journey to Mount Ortoten. The worsening weather and deep snow forced them to build a camp after traveling only 1.5 miles onto Mount Holochacal, the Dead Mountain. Before morning, all 9 friends would be dead.
When the group failed to come back to Yekaterinburg on the 12th of February, no one was immediately alarmed. The first person who was alarmed was Rima Kalivatova, the sister of Sasha Kalivatov, and she started to make telephone calls to the explorer clubs, to the university.
It wasn't until February 21st, over a week after the hikers were due to have sent word of their return, that the first teams of search parties were deployed. However, with only a rough idea of the team's expected location, it would prove to be a difficult task. The search teams comprised of professionals, military, and fellow student members of the university's Explorers Club. For those friends, this was still a rescue mission. Evgeny was a member of another hiking team in a similar area. His and Dyatlov's teams were expecting to connect on their return journey.
Дальше ребят уже не стало. Мы все недоумевали, почему они не явились вовремя. Мы были готовы к тому, чтобы пойти в ту команду, которая занялась поисками ребят.
An aerial search was conducted along with multiple teams on the ground, and it would take several days before the rescuers got their first clue: the hikers' partially snow-covered tent. Officially, the tent was found on February the 26th by fellow student hikers Boris Slobstov and Mikhail Sharavin. They were accompanied by a local forestry worker, Ivan Pashin, who lived and worked alongside the Mansi people in the region. However, Pashin later stated in his testimony,
On February 23rd, we were dropped off by a helicopter. Once we descended, we found ski tracks from the hikers. Here we pitched a tent and spent the night. The next day we divided into groups and went to look for the hikers. As a result of the search, we found the tent with belongings.
This statement was backed up by his friend and fellow search team member, Cheglakov.
On the second day we found the tent of the hikers. It was badly snow-drifted. We didn't go inside.
It's incredible to me that these two men did not look inside for any signs of the hikers, or perhaps even more incredible, that they didn't report such a huge finding right away. Officially, it would take 2 more days of aerial and ground searches before Slobstov and Sharavin, accompanied by Pashin, spotted the tent on Mount Holochacal. As they ascended the mountain, Pashin refused to go with them.
For me, it speaks for the fact that he has already heard something from the Mansi, that something happened on the slope, but he felt like it's better to stay away from this matter. They had also their traditions, and they didn't want anyone to mess with that.
As they approached their friend's tent, it quickly became apparent that this was an unusual scene. Along with the flashlight found on top of the snow, what they found left inside was more worrying.
The tent itself was torn. There were food supplies in bags at the feet, and the blankets were unfolded. Under the blankets, spread out, were their quilted jackets, storm jackets, and backpacks laid on the floor.
With no trace of the hikers, finding their winter clothes and boots was unnerving. The following day, the search parties focused their attention on the tent site. And further down the slope, the rescuers found their next clue.
Approximately 15-20 meters from the tent, footprints of the people's feet were visible on the snow, and it was evident that the tracks were left by the feet of a person without shoes. It should be noted that the tracks were initially together, next to each other, and then distant tracks diverged.
Later stories would suggest that the hikers fled in a panic from some terrifying event. but the footsteps as seen by Slobstov clearly show how the hikers walked or marched side by side away from the tent. The searchers followed the partially visible tracks down the slope, where the team uncovered their first grisly discovery. The bodies of Krivnishenko and Doroshenko were found under a cedar tree nearly a mile away from the tent. Evgeny Maslenikov, head of the University Sports Club, wrote,
The bodies were in a half-naked state. On Krivonishenko's body was a checkered shirt, torn white underpants and trunks, no other clothing. On Doroshenko's body was a shirt, checkered shirt, padded pants and shorts, no other clothing. Inspection detected that they lit or were in the presence of a pretty decent fire of cedar and fir tree branches.
Later that same day, 1,000 feet away from the cedar tree, the team made another grim discovery: the frozen body of group leader Igor Dyatlov. He had collapsed around a small birch tree facing towards the tent, suggesting that he was attempting to return.
Dyatlov was dressed warmer than Krivonishenko and Doroshenko, but he wasn't wearing a hat, shoes and gloves, nor an undershirt or jacket. 350 meters uphill from Dyatlov, we found the body of Zina Kolmogorova. She was lying sideways, knees pulled up to her stomach, arms bent at the elbows and held up to her face. Zina was dressed better than Dyatlov, but she did not have a jacket, shoes or gloves.
Finding the bodies of the 4 hikers was a devastating blow to the rescue party.
Нет, никто не ожидал, что они погибли. Такого еще не было же в истории нашего института. Поэтому все думали, это самое. И даже когда нашли палатку, и то ребята думали, что где-то они, возможно. То есть такого не было. А потом уже лавина горя накинулась на всех, на нас. Поэтому...
In the following days, the search teams painstakingly probed the deep snow for any signs of their comrades. On March 5th, 6 long days after the discovery of the first 4 bodies, the searchers uncovered another, Rostam Solobodin. He too was found facing in the direction of the tent, suggesting he was also trying to make a desperate return to shelter and warm clothing. All 5 of the hikers found so far were flown to Ivdel for autopsy. The searchers' grim task continued, and the days turned into weeks, with no new clues as to where the remaining 4 hikers could be. In a bizarre parallel to Dyatlov's journey, our own expedition has been hit by a savage blizzard and a dangerous drop in temperature on the day we were due to make it to the pass. So, we had a crazy amount of wind, snow, cold weather last night. It was pretty cold in the tent, and we've lost all sign the track we came in on, so riding out today was really tough. We're never going to make it to the Dyalov Pass today. Moving today would just be very, very dangerous. And as you can see, temperature is brutal. Today it could be minus 40, maybe more. This is brutal conditions.
My face is really beginning to freeze. It's frozen by the Proverbs during March. I think I need to get into some shelter for at least something.
Nature calls the shots out here, and to try to make the pass today would be far too dangerous. The autopsy of the 5 hikers was conducted in Ivdel by forensic medical expert Vorozdiny. Doroshenko, Krivnishenko, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova and Solobodin were all found to have suffered various cuts and bruises to the body, Specific injuries included bruising, cuts, and abrasions to the nose, eyebrows, and cheeks. Further bruising and abrasions were found on the knuckles and the back of the hands. Yet under close watch from the party officials, Voroshiny concluded that all of these injuries were simply as a result of falling over. The official cause of death for all 5 was stated as hypothermia.
Today, if you see a guy with his upper lip swollen, a black eye, and his fists scabbed over, do you think that he panicked and he ran really fast and he threw himself against the rocks? No, your first thought is there must be a fight.
A rumor spread that perhaps the group turned on themselves. Investigator Ivanov feared that the party leaders would use this to cover up the truth of the investigation, something he wasn't prepared to let happen.
Иванов, он нам выдал несколько пачек фотобумаги. Печатайте как можно больше фотографий вот их живых. Я спросил, а зачем так много? Он сказал, мы, во-первых, раздадим всем и родственникам, и туристам, раздадим всем. А во-вторых, говорит, есть люди, которые пытаются вот это все происшествие свалить на самих туристов. Иванов был категорически против такого варианта.
In an effort to divert the growing attention, the officials attempted to quietly bury the hikers hundreds of miles away from their home city. This only fueled conspiracy theories, and under mounting public pressure, the officials were forced to return the hikers home.
Back in the city, the people tried to make sense of what have happened. They questioned military authorities. Why? How come? What could be in the middle of nowhere? Why would they die? And the funerals, they were just huge, just exactly what the authority wanted to prevent. It happened. There were thousands and thousands of people who attended during the funeral.
Those that were there remember being watched by the KGB, stoking fears that the military were to blame. Rumors of unusual lights in the sky, strange photographs, and secret military tests began to spread. Vladislav Karelin and his team were hiking in the Urals, not far from the Dyatlov Pass, only 2 weeks after the tragedy, when they themselves witnessed an unusual celestial event.
Раннее утро, я слышу сквозь сон крик дежурных, которые вышли раньше готовить завтрак. «Ребята, ребята, смотрите-ка!» И я выскочил из спальника, из шатра, в чем был, без обуви, без верхней одежды. Значит, вверху, в небе, я увидел какое-то светлое пятно в виде шара округлого. И очень быстро скрылся за деревьями леса. Что это было, мы в то время даже представить себе не могли.
Could Karelin's sighting prove the hiker's controversial photo was, in fact, a real object?
Но спустя несколько лет нам стали по телевидению показывать запуски ракет с Байконура. Да я вот эту картину я и видел 17 февраля 1959 года.
Given the sightings in 1959, many involved with the Dyatlov Foundation believe the military rocket theory is the most plausible.
Я думаю, вот этот боеприпас, который испытывался, он и повлиял на них. Это мог быть и взрыв, и вспышка яркая.
Yet Karelin's own team also witnessed these lights, but it certainly didn't scare them from fleeing the safety of their tent.
Well, I don't believe there could be a rocket or military experiment that injured the hikers. Well, definitely there was something going on in the sky at that period of time. The event was pretty far from them, since they were capable of taking pictures, and it lasted at least 1-2 minutes. It means it was not threatening to them.
Certainly, the autopsy reports from the first 5 hikers showed no obvious signs of injury from a missile blast. Nor were there any signs of an explosion or debris reported by the search teams. With this frustratingly conflicting evidence, the investigators could only hope that finding the last 4 hikers would unravel the mystery. Three months after the incident and the melting snows led to a breakthrough. Mansi native Kurakov spotted some cut branches only 150 feet from the cedar tree that seemed to form a trail. Along with his dog, he discovered the remains of some clothing which appeared to be cut by a knife. The search team swiftly focused in on the area and began to dig. Buried under more than 10 feet of snow, they found a small den. Cut branches were laid to make a makeshift floor, but there was no sign of the hikers. Fellow student hiker Vladimir Ashkenazy was one of the students tasked with probing the area to look for his friends.
А у меня был щуп профессиональный, альпийский. У него на конце крючок. Его втыкаешь, потом поворачиваешь и вытаскиваешь. И в один из стычков мягкое, ну ладно. Так и думал, что это мох. Повернул, вытаскиваю, а это кусок мяса. Вот, сразу же оврал. Все прибежали из палатки. Начали быстро раскапывать. Вот раскопали Люду.
Buried 12 feet under the snow was the body of Lyudmila Dubnina. She was found in a small ravine collapsed over a natural ledge. The 3 remaining bodies of Kolevatov, Thibault, and Zolotaryov were found close to Dubnina. They lay next to each other, perhaps in a desperate attempt to share body warmth in their final moments.
И ни один из туристов, будем говорить так, а-ля Золотарев, вот, держал записную книжку в руках. Артюков, когда увидел, аж подпрыгнул. Он начал листать. Мокрая записная книжка, он листал, и она чистая оказалась. Ничего там не было записано.
The bodies were carefully removed and carried back to the evacuation point. But the fears of military tests and possible radiation contamination was rife. The helicopter pilots, fearing the risk of radiation poisoning, refused to transport the bodies until they were placed in zinc-lined cases. The move suggested that even senior officials were growing suspicious. And the autopsy was about to reveal some grim and unexpected details. Thibault, although found dressed warmer than the first 5 hikers, had suffered a mysterious and devastating blow to the right side of his head.
Autopsy report. Boris Возрожденный. I don't believe these wounds could have been the result of Thibault simply falling from the level of his own height, that is, falling and hitting his head. The extensive, depressed, multi-splintered fracture could be likened to the result of an impact with an automobile moving at high speed.
The examiners found that Kolevatov was also dressed reasonably well against the elements with ski jacket and pants. However, his boots were missing and he too had some unusual injuries.
There is a wound of undetermined shape behind the right ear. The neck is long and thin and deformed in the area of the thyroid cartilage.
The examiner seemed to make little effort to better understand the cause of these injuries. Officially, he stated that they died from freezing to death. Still, the mystery only deepened. Zolotaryov, the oldest of the team, was again found with a basic level of clothing, underlayers, ski pants, and a jacket with the upper buttons undone. the examiner noted the horrific facial decay, presumably from the stream he was found in. But it was the unexplained crushing impact to Zolotaryov's chest that was most unusual.
The multiple fractures of Zolotaryov's ribs with hemorrhaging into the pleural cavity were caused while still alive and as an effect from a high-power impact to the chest of Zolotaryov at the moment of his fall, squeezing or throwing. Zolotaryov died as a result of violence.
Lyuda wore ski pants which were badly fire damaged and 2 sweaters. Missing her snow boots, she had desperately wrapped a torn sweater around her feet. She was found lying face down in a stream of melting snow. The examiner stated this caused the horrific decaying facial tissue and her missing eyes. Incredibly, he also noted that her tongue was missing, without any further explanation as to why. Shockingly, there was a similar finding to Zolotaryov. Lyuda suffered a brutal impact to her chest, fracturing multiple ribs, and was powerful enough to puncture her heart.
I think that the death of Lyuda Dubinina was caused by massive hemorrhage into the right ventricle of the heart, multiple bilateral rib fractures, and internal bleeding. The trauma was caused during life and is the result of high-force impact with subsequent fall or throw to the chest of Dubinina.
The forensic examiner's confounding conclusions did little to explain the tragedy and only raised more questions. Lead investigator Ivanov had little to work on, and given the speculation of military tests, he ordered the students' clothes to be tested for radioactivity. Incredibly, some of those found in the ravine showed above normal levels of radiation. For Ivanov, there was no obvious answer in sight. As the whispers of rockets, military tests, and now radiation spread, the investigation was seemingly out of control. The Soviet government, frustrated and unable to curb the rumors that implicated their own military, summoned Ivanov back to headquarters and ordered that the case be closed.
Будучи человеком в погонах, подчинялся своим начальникам. И его заставляли принять формулировку, которую он и предпринял.
It is concluded that the cause of their demise was from an unknown compelling force, which the tourists were not able to overcome. The criminal case on the death of the group of tourists and further proceedings are to be terminated.
No further investigation was carried out. The strange circumstances and injuries simply left unexplained. Now the case files, hidden until the fall of the Soviet Union, will be the key to uncovering the truth. We've traveled nearly 100 miles, and we're just a few miles from the Dyatlov Pass. Our expedition was forced to camp for the night and take shelter from a brutal storm. The worst seems to have passed, but today's challenge will be to navigate the deep snow.
It's snowing quite a lot, and I know they were concerned about the safety of us getting to the pass yesterday. I don't think it's going to get any easier today. I'm determined to get there, so we'll take the snowmobiles as far as we can go, and then we'll hike the rest of the way.
The heavy snow on the mountain is making it difficult for the snowmobiles to stay upright or avoid rocks lurking deceptively just below the surface. Even a small injury out here could prove deadly.
This is our first steep slope that we had to come up. It was a bit too steep for 2 people, so I walked the rest of the way. I think there's gonna be a lot more of that today. This is tough conditions.
Leaving the snowmobiles behind, we make the rest of the journey on foot. traveling a relatively short distance of just a couple of miles in this deep snow is incredibly slow going. Finally, through the thickening skies, the Boot Rock comes into view. This was the landing area for the search teams back in 1959. It's truly an incredible experience for me. I can hardly believe I've journeyed this far and I'm almost at the very location of the Dyatlov Pass incident. The names of the 9 hikers that died here on February the 1st, 1959, will forever be remembered in this beautiful yet desolate place. We still have a tough walk ahead of us, but I'm determined to make it to the actual location where the Dyatlov Group tent was found. So we push on into darkening skies. My journey has led me through many incredible theories on this case, and perhaps the most shocking is about to be revealed.
Меня зовут Наталья Сахарова. Я эксперт-криминалист. 10 лет я работала врачом в системе исполнения наказания. И затем 16 лет я работала в полиции экспертом-криминалистом.
Sakharova has studied the document extensively and found a number of problems, starting with the tent. The experts' opinions at the time suggested that the tent was cut from the inside by the hikers. This fact was instrumental in leading the investigators away from any theory that the hikers may have been attacked.
Я крайне сомневаюсь, что палатку разрезали туристы. Крайне сомневаюсь. Это не один разрез. Палатка изодрана в клочья. Это сходная ткань. Это сходная ткань. Это палаточный брезент. Сейчас я наносила удар изнутри. Волокна образуют горку. Вот что должна была искать эксперт. Направление волокон. Это если идет изнутри. Тогда горка будет снаружи. Смотреть нужно не здесь. Смотреть нужно здесь. На фотографиях экспертизы нет концевых точек. Эксперт их просто не видела, она не знала, где смотреть.
If the findings from the tent examination led the investigators away from the theory that the hikers may have been attacked, that may have also clouded their interpretation of later evidence.
Собственно, все, что по-настоящему интересно, все отражено в протоколах. Все это имеется в протоколах. В протоколах вскрытия тел. Весь мой опыт работы эксперта-криминалиста, он говорит о том, что это не несчастный случай, это убийство.
If Sakharova is right, then the proof that the hikers were murdered may well be right here in the autopsy reports, hidden in plain sight. But I'm going to need some help to decipher the clues.
My name is Ken Holmes, and I was in the Marin County Coroner's Office for 36 years, the last 12 of which I was the elected coroner. And we handled all the death investigations that occurred in the county of Marin. I believe the autopsies probably are very thorough, but I would disagree with the accuracy of the conclusions for at least 7 of them. The amount of trauma absolutely precludes any sort of accidental fall, at least from their own height, certainly not just walking along in the snow and falling down. It appears that the officials involved at the time of the autopsies basically tried to sweep this entire thing under the rug, trying to make it look like some unfortunate accident.
My name is Mick Fennerty. I'm a retired
special agent with the FBI. I spent just over 20 years working for the FBI, and I spent almost 15 years total on our evidence response team, the team responsible for investigating our more complex crime scenes. Many cases are filled with strange things, but yeah, this one has several. If you look at the simplest explanation, the Principal Occam's razor, that the most simple answer is often the most correct answer. Hikers were forced out of their tent. I mean, you just can't explain why they would leave their boots, you know, unless they were forced out into the cold. Why they didn't immediately return to the tent knowing that they were going to die of exposure out in the cold without boots. When you look at the wounds that were on the hikers, I'm just not buying the accidental things. This is a homicide.
These new experts have all suggested that what happened to Dyatlov's team was no accident. So we know that both Lyudmila and Zolotaryov both suffered bone-crushing injuries to the chests. And given the position of the bodies, we know it couldn't have come from the same impact.
My thinking is that he was laying down, maybe on his back, and something very, very heavy dropped across him. Could it have been someone stepping on him or stomping on him? Certainly possible. The interesting thing is that the rib fractures are all very high. They start right underneath the collarbone and only go about halfway down, which is not typical of somebody falling down on their own or falling against rocks or a log. So it's more likely that he was stationary and something heavy came down upon him.
Lyudmila suffered similar but more devastating injuries.
The rib fractures, they were of such impact that the ribs flexed after being broken and actually punctured the heart. That takes an incredible blow. And the ones that I have seen is either in a motor vehicle accident or a fall from a very high place. And I'm talking above 50 feet. She didn't just trip and fall and go down on her chest. Something very, very heavy fell against her. Could one person do that? Yes. But again, it would take a pretty hefty person. If they were doing it on their own, they would be probably jumping or throwing themselves against her.
Lyudmila was missing her eyeballs and her tongue. The autopsy report said this was because she was lying face down in a stream underneath the snow. Now that may attribute the soft tissue damage to her eyes, but the tongue is much bigger muscle. To me, that seems strange.
Язык отсутствует, в желудке обнаружена кровь. Вероятно, это очень вероятно, я не утверждаю, что язык был или вырван, или отрезан.
Thibault was found in the same stream as these two, except he had a massive fracture to his right temple. Even the autopsy report said it was highly unlikely he could have suffered this injury simply from falling over.
He easily could have been struck. The kind of blow that is described, it looks like the head was unsupported. In other words, it wasn't on the ground where something hit his head so that it couldn't move away.
Klevetov was the fourth member of the team to be found in the same stream. Klevetov actually suffered a really sizable wound behind his ear, which is really unusual to do by accidentally falling over. The autopsy report also noted that his neck had been damaged.
Повреждены хрящи шеи, рана за правым ухом. Это не несчастный случай. Этого человека, вероятно, задушили.
The first to be found by the cedar tree are Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivnishenko. Doroshenko had cuts and bruises to the eyes, nose, and lips, but he also had bruising and abrasing to the inside of the arms and into the armpits. Krivnishenko, his injuries included bruising to the forehead, around the left temporal bone. His knuckles and fingers were bruised and swollen, and he also suffered terrible burn to his left leg. For For me, what's really strange about the injuries to both Krivnishenko and Doroshenko was the fact that their injuries actually weren't so bad, with perhaps the exception of the burn to Krivnishenko's left leg. What was actually stopping them from returning to the tent? Rustem Slobodin was found 500 meters away from the cedar tree. It looked like he was heading back towards the tent. He was found with bruised knuckles, as well as bruising to the face and lips. Rustem suffered a massive fracture to the side of his skull.
Очень маловероятно, что это образовалось от падения на камни. Нет. От падения на камни образуется повреждение на ладонях. Прежде всего на ладонях. Потом образуется повреждение на лицевой части, но не на виске. Нет.
Rustem was probably knocked unconscious very near to where he was found, so whatever struck him was a very different event to what happened to the others. Zina was found 600 meters away from the cedar tree. She was found with bruising all around her face. Zina also suffered a 30-centimeter long bruise across the back and the kidney area, which must have knocked the wind out of her. But also she had bad bruising across both knuckles. Again, was she fighting some attackers?
Well, certainly you could make a case for that. On the other hand, you could also make a case that over the course of the 3 or 4 days before she died, she could have done it scraping against ice accidentally. I would say it looks to me like she was defending herself with some of the bruises, but then on her knuckles, that's not indicative of a defensive wound as much as it is of a thrusting from her standpoint.
Igor Dyatlov was found lying again in the direction of the tent, suggesting that he too was trying to go back for supplies. As a respected group leader, I don't think for a second he wouldn't have done his best to try and help himself and the team. The autopsy report stated that he had bruising to his knuckles, but what's most interesting to me was he had bruising and abrasions to both his wrists and ankles.
Повреждения левый голеностоп, обе лодыжки, ссадины с сдавленной кожей. То есть глубокие царапины. Я предполагаю, что этих людей связывали. Их связывали поверх одежды. Именно поэтому молодые и сильные люди очень быстро ослабели на морозе. Они были связаны.
I have tried and tried and tried. I've spent a great deal of time trying to come up with a scenario that would cover the variety of injuries, the spacing of the people and where they're found and how they're found. It's very difficult for me to come up with any scenario other than there must have been some other people present.
Like every theory in this case, there always seems to be one piece of the puzzle that just doesn't fit. In this case, it's the lights in the sky. Carolyn and others still believe that rockets were in some way connected. Yet there's no evidence of an explosion at the site. But could some rockets have affected the hikers in another way?
Может быть, это химия была. Может быть, это психологическое какое-то воздействие. Может быть, это их оглушило, ослепило. Я не знаю, что. Вот мое мнение.
Any volatile gas that could have affected these people, no way to prove it would be there after such a long time in the snow. But there didn't seem to be any description from the lungs or the throats for the type of injuries that we see with gas.
But even if a chemical had affected them psychologically, that doesn't explain how they later received those violent injuries so far away from the tent. In those conditions, it could have taken the group more than an hour to walk that distance without skis. Why would they walk relatively calmly for an hour and then lose their minds and inflict those injuries on themselves? It just doesn't add up. I do believe it plausible that the Soviets were testing rockets over the Urals at the time, but I just don't see any evidence that it could have directly affected the group. For me, I think the lights in the sky are a red herring. They've derailed the case for more than 60 years, and they continue to today. But there's still another difficult piece of the puzzle that has fueled the military conspiracy theories for more than 60 years. Radiation. 2 of the 4 hikers found in the ravine, Lyuda and Kolevatov, both wore clothes that tested positive for radiation. For many, this is proof that some military weapon killed the hikers. But if that was the case, how come radiation wasn't found on any other member of the team? Again, we need to look for the simplest answer. The sweater Lyuda was wearing showed the highest levels of radiation, but in fact, this sweater belonged to Krivnishenko, who was found near the cedar tree. It looks like Lyuda may have taken his sweater after his death. I've recently found a document that shows that Krivnishenko actually worked at a nuclear facility, which only a year and a half earlier suffered a major nuclear explosion. The Kyshtym disaster was at the time the world's largest nuclear disaster, and even today it's the 3rd largest after Fukushima and Chernobyl. Incredibly, most of us have never even heard of it, and that's because it was almost entirely concealed by the Soviets at the time. In 1957, just a few days after the explosion, hundreds of local villagers had died of radiation poisoning and more than 10,000 were subsequently evacuated. Given that this was one of the world's first major nuclear explosions, it wouldn't be a surprise to me that the cleanup team, including Krivnishenko, were unprepared and unprotected. It's likely that he even suspected his authorities of being careless towards their safety. I've recently been sent a copy of a letter written by Krivnishenko himself that seems to express his frustration.
Please provide me with payment and accept my resignation at my own request from the company, due to my complete unwillingness to work in this system.
The second positive test for radiation was on Kolevatov's clothes. Incredibly, I found that after graduation, he too went to work for a secretive nuclear facility in Moscow. It's quite possible that he either came into contact with materials from the Kyshtym site, or he may have simply worn the contaminated sweater before giving it to Lyuda. For me, the likelihood that the radiation found on the hikers' clothes came from an actual nuclear meltdown where we know Krivnishenko worked is far more likely than some experimental weapons attack. So if rockets and radiation were explainable red herrings, why was the military still so eager to be involved?
All this secrecy was around this case not because there was some military experiment or rocket crash, but because Lev Ivanov reported to his supervisors that there were some strange phenomena in the sky observed. They just didn't want any information out before the investigation is done.
This was during the tensions of the Cold War. The race for nuclear supremacy was of the highest importance. We now know that Krivnishenko and Kolevatov had reasonable ways in which they could have come into contact with radiation. But importantly, from the Soviet position, that's 2 hikers who may have had access to secret information or materials.
Значит, была такая опасность для властей, не столько реальная опасность, сколько они сами себя перепугали. Сказали, вы там посмотрите следы. Может быть, они могли уйти. Ну, Америка.
Finding the last 4 bodies must have been a relief for the authorities. They now knew that the hikers had not defected as spies. But when Ivanov requested a radiation examination, the Soviets were faced with a new challenge. Information about the nuclear disaster at Kyshtym might leak to the public. This would have been a massive blow to Russia's nuclear credibility. Lev even wrote about his experiences years after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
When I reported to my superiors my findings, fireballs, radioactivity, he gave a completely categorical order to classify everything, to seal everything up, to hand it over to the special unit and forget about it.
The Soviet government had their answer. The hikers had not defected. The true cause of the tragedy was of little consequence to them now, and the truth about the Dyatlov Pass was buried along with the hikers. So if the Soviet government wasn't involved in the hikers' death, who was? The Dyatlov Pass is 50 miles away from the nearest village of Vizhai. The only people known to go near the pass were the indigenous Mansi people. And so, the Mansi were the original prime suspects.
To the chief of the Ivdel Department of Internal Affairs militia major, it is necessary to corroborate if the hikers were attacked by Mansi with religious motives.
Despite the suspicion, the Mansi were quickly ruled out for two key reasons. One, the investigators believed the hikers cut their own way out of the tent, although I've already uncovered that this was not definitively proven and probably incorrect. Secondly, the local Russians testified that the Mansi were friendly and some even offered to help in the search efforts. But does a friend's recommendation or being helpful to officials rule you out of suspicion?
No, we certainly have seen unsolved homicides, all sorts of cases. The perpetrator will come back and insert themselves into the investigation. That's something that's common.
The Bataryov family lived in a nomadic camp of yurts in the upper reaches of the Vizhai River. One of the brothers, Peter Bataryov, said in interview,
Mansi don't have a prayer mountain nowadays. I don't pray, and I do not know of a prayer mountain.
Yet just 10 days earlier, his brother Nikita, who lived in the same family camp, stated,
Mansi Prayer Mountain is located near the Bakhtiaryov's yurts, 30 kilometers in the upper Vizhai River. There aren't any other sacred Mansi places.
The testimonies were clearly conflicting, and we now know there were more sacred places. Closer to Dyatlov's route, the hikers unknowingly took a photo of what we now know was a sacred cave. To the north, Manpapa Nur was the most sacred place of all. Its mighty towers tell the story of a great Mansi shaman who turned giant warriors into stone when they threatened to destroy the Mansi. And at Mount Otarten, the very destination of the Dyatlov team, similar stone pillars are found. During an interview, another member of the Bataryov family, Pavel, stated that he never went near the mountains where the Dyatlov team were found.
In winter, there are strong winds that make it impossible to go to the mountain. Even for us Mansi, it can be dangerous to go to the mountains.
But despite insisting Mansi didn't go to this area, there were signs that suggest someone did.
There were people who were present in the area. We know that there was a discovery of tomb like meters above the tent. And the search party saw this tomb, and we have a picture of it.
So the Mansi interviewed at the time said they didn't go near the mountains and they certainly didn't hunt in the area. But here we have proof that someone was. But just because there were some indigenous people in the area, that doesn't mean there was any real motive for an attack. But when I dug deeper, there were signs that the Russian and indigenous people's cohabitation wasn't always harmonious. In the 1930s, the Soviets formed a new town called Kazim in the Siberian Mansi-Khanty region. The idea was to bring schools and medical facilities to the local people as part of the Soviet collectivization. However, these changes were imposed on the locals who were not given a say in the matter. They were forced to comply with Soviet rules, and their children were forcibly taken to attend boarding schools, where they were forbidden to practice their native language and beliefs. Understandably, the local people were outraged, and rebelled against the authorities, resulting in a number of deadly conflicts in the 1930s. Following these clashes, Mansi and Hanti culture was outlawed. Sacred grounds were destroyed, and shamans practicing ancient rituals were imprisoned. The outlawing of thousands of years of cultural belief and history would have undoubtedly fueled a bitter resentment towards the Soviets. These rituals and practices were still officially illegal when the Dyatlov group attempted to reach Mount Ototen. Yet signs of their tradition still persist today.
Историко-этнографический парк «Земля предков» занят историей коренных народов, в частности, коренного народа Манси. Здесь коллекции, которые мы собирали 15 лет, и, по сути дела, мы пытаемся сохранить то, что исчезает очень быстро. Медведь сам по себе, по мансийским представлениям, нечто среднее между человеком, зверем и богом. С одной стороны, медведь – сын высшего бога, священный первопредок, с другой стороны, это объект охоты. Ни одна косточка медведя не выбрасывалась. Череп обвязывался ремнем и весился на сосну. 10 лет назад вот этих идолов, мы обнаружили, что на теле идола сохранились кровавые пятна. Скорее всего, кто-то приносил жертву. Последним хозяином была женщина. Женщины ритуалов, тем более кровавых, не приносят. И кто-то с ее согласия приходил и кормил духов, кровью кормил.
We now know there were sacred places in the mountains, and I'm not the first to wonder if the Dyatlov group stumbled onto a place of great importance to the Mansi.
Вероятнее всего, туристы сделали что-то недопустимое. Они невольно нарушили какие-то императивные местные запреты. Они чужие в этих местах, они пришли со своими привычками на чужую землю. Возможно, они взяли с охотничьей тропы Манси, что трогать не следовало бы, там, где они шли. Это мог быть талисман, который был оставлен на удачу. То есть мы достоверно не можем сказать, что они сделали, но со стороны туристов была совершена какая-то фатальная ошибка из-за незнания обычаев.
Do you think it's possible the Mansi might have killed the hikers because they came across a sacred site or perhaps a sacred artifact?
Кроме того, вот в этом районе, я уже неоднократно говорил, никаких сакральных предметов нет и не могло быть. И какие-либо вновь возникающие версии о том, что группа лыжников могла что-то найти в горах в большие снега, невозможно. Сакральные места посещают очень нечасто. Они, как правило, сокрыты от посторонних. Найти их очень сложно. Тот, кто говорит о том, что манси причастны к гибели дятловцев, не знает этот народ.
Speaking with Alexei, I'm reminded how dangerous and unfair it is to make generalizations towards whole groups of people. Since the Dyatlov incident, there have been no other reports of Mansi attacking Russians over sacred lands. And certainly my journey to the pass was met with a warm welcome. But the evidence so far still suggests to me that it was murder. So I keep looking.
Whoever attacked the students, they were flesh and blood, because students were capable of fighting back. Generally, the people who lived in the area, they called the Mansi. There are yet another people called the Hanti. They are not living there constantly, but there were rumors that some of them just several of them, were living secludedly in the area, and they were not friends with Mansi or with Russians.
Digging through the official reports, I spotted a detail that might just provide the biggest clue yet. The official report from police officer Goboshin in the town of Ivdel. He speaks of an informal conversation he had with a member of the Mansi Kurikov family.
Kurikov said that near the Holy Mountain there live 5 Khanty. They are like savages. They are not friends with Mansi or with Russian people. And these Khanty could kill tourists because they wanted to climb the Holy Mountain.
Later, a member of the Kurikov family, Grigory, was officially interviewed.
About the fact that near the sacred place there live 5 Khanty Urani people and that they are afraid of Mansi, I personally did not say any such thing. That includes to the police.
Despite the police officer's tantalizing piece of information, the suspicion that other indigenous people were living in the area was not further investigated. And there's one last clue. A strip of dark material found at the cedar tree where the first 2 bodies were discovered. Search party member Boris Slobstov wrote,
I was present when we found on the same cedar a cloth belt of dark color with tassels at the ends. I don't know who this item belongs to. It looks like a belt or strap with which the Mansi pull loads.
Despite the clues and evidence of violence, the authorities dropped the search for any possible attackers. The truth of this unknown, compelling force has remained hidden under wintry snows and tightly held secrets for more than 60 years.
The crushing injuries and the skull fractures, because they're so different, there had to be 3 or 4 assailants involved in whatever this incident was, and I don't believe that in any way could this be an accident.
Самый главный признак присутствия других людей – это трупы туристов с очень тяжелыми травмами, которые нельзя иначе расценить как убийство.
When you look at the wounds that were on the hikers, I'm just not buying the accidental thing. This is a homicide.
Кто, за что и как, при каких обстоятельствах, это непонятно, но то, что дело рук человеческих, их жизни.
По-другому я это объяснить не могу, кроме как убийством.
I have a strong conviction that military people wouldn't do it this way. There is an expression in Russian, if there is no body, there is no case.
From the beginning, this mystery captured my imagination, and after 2 years of studying the case, it's become something more. Every diary entry, every glance in every photo seems to hide a clue, like a distant voice compelling me to join the search.
So this is roughly where the Dyatlov tent was found. It's incredible to be here, and I can see why they wanted to be out here. It's beautiful and it's so isolated. We're like 100 kilometers away from any other village. It must have been absolutely exhilarating for them to have been hiking in these types of locations. And it's still a mystery as to what happened, but I certainly understand better why they came out here in the first place now.
In some small way, I feel I've come to know the hikers. I certainly wish I could have had the chance to have met them. I think we could have shared in an adventure or 2. There may be more evidence and theories surrounding this case to come, but out of respect of the Dyatlov group, I believe they should all be explored with an open mind. We may be looking at it through different lenses, but our vision is the same: to lay to rest the mystery of an unknown, compelling force.